It began with compliments. "You've lost weight. You look great." And at 73, Harold took them to heart. He hadn't changed his eating habits, hadn't started walking more, hadn't done anything new. The weight just slipped off. He smiled politely. Inside, he felt something strange. He wasn't trying to lose weight. And though his pants fit looser, climbing stairs left him winded. Getting out of a chair took 2 tries. His balance felt unsure, like he was walking on a boat that wouldn't stop rocking. Still, he told himself, this must be what aging is. That quiet resignation, that subtle surrender. It hides behind phrases like, "I'm just slowing down," or "everyone my age feels like this." But then came the moment he couldn't ignore. One morning, he bent down to tie his shoe. As he tried to stand, his legs trembled. No pain, no dizziness, just a hollow weakness, as if the muscles simply weren't there anymore. He sat back down, embarrassed, even though no one was watching. That's when he noticed. His thighs weren't just thinner, they were softer. The firmness he used to feel when he pressed them, gone. His arms, once strong enough to lift boxes, now struggled with the kettle. It wasn't fat he was losing, it was muscle. And muscle loss after 65 isn't a cosmetic issue, it's a survival issue. Doctors call it sarcopenia, but most people never hear that word until they're already struggling to stand up from the toilet without help. It creeps in slowly, silently. It doesn't hurt. That's what makes it so dangerous. By the time Harold realized he couldn't carry groceries like he used to, or lift his granddaughter without effort, his independence was already fading. But the worst part, he didn't feel sick. There was no fever, no alarm, nothing that made him think, "I need help." That's what fools so many people. We associate danger with pain, but muscle loss is quiet. And for men and women over 65, it's one of the leading contributors to falls, hospital stays, and even early death. Harold wasn't alone. Millions feel this slow erosion and assume it's just normal aging. They wait until a fall, a fracture, or a long recovery finally exposes the truth. But there is another way. Because while muscle can fade, it can also come back, even at 73, even after years of loss. But first, we have to learn to recognize the signals before it's too late. And for Harold, the signal had already come. It wasn't the compliments. It was the moment his legs couldn't hold him anymore. Harold never liked asking for help. Even when things got harder, like lifting his arms to shave or bending to pick up his socks, he preferred to laugh it off. "Just getting old," he'd say. But that morning, the joke didn't land. It was early, the kind of quiet where the house still feels half asleep. He stepped into the bathroom barefoot, still a little groggy, holding on to the sink for balance. The tile felt cold, slippery. He reached for the towel rack to steady himself, and that's when it happened. His foot slid forward. His arms reached out, but his legs didn't catch him. There was no dramatic crash, just a soft, humiliating thud. His hip hit the floor, followed by his elbow, and finally, the back of his head. Not hard enough to cause real injury, just hard enough to steal his breath and fill him with dread. He lay there for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling. Not in pain, in disbelief. Why didn't my body catch me? That's the question that echoed louder than the fall itself. This wasn't about clumsiness. It wasn't about slippery tiles or a careless step. This was about something deeper, something inside him that had stopped working. As he pulled himself up, using the sink and toilet like crutches, the truth hit harder than the floor ever could. His body no longer felt reliable, and for the first time, he didn't feel safe in his own home. Muscle loss doesn't make headlines in your life. It's not like a stroke or a heart attack. It doesn't happen all at once. It hides behind small defeats, needing 2 hands to open a jar, skipping the stairs for the elevator, avoiding long walks because the knees aren't what they used to be. But these small choices slowly rewire your life, and over time, they become cages. The fall wasn't just physical. It broke something emotional, too. That unspoken fear of becoming dependent, the shame of being vulnerable, the quiet panic of wondering, is this just the beginning? That day, Harold didn't call anyone. He cleaned himself up. He made his coffee. He sat at the table, staring at the steam rising from the cup, and said something he hadn't said in years. "I think I need help." And in that quiet admission, something opened. Because acknowledging the problem isn't weakness. It's the first act of strength. Muscle loss after 65 doesn't always knock you down. But when it does, like it did for Harold, it can wake you up. And sometimes, hitting the floor is how you finally find the ground beneath you. Harold didn't diet. He wasn't watching carbs, counting calories, or skipping meals. Yet the scale kept dropping. 10 pounds, then 15. His pants hung loose around his waist. His belt, once snug, now wrapped tighter with each passing month. At first, it felt like luck. "You're one of the lucky ones," friends would say. But Harold didn't feel lucky. He felt weaker. He remembered how light his grocery bags felt now. Not because the bags were lighter, but because he couldn't carry as much. He remembered struggling to open the jar of peanut butter. Not long ago, he could twist it open with ease. This wasn't fat melting away. This was something else, something scarier. Muscle. Most people think of weight loss as a victory. We're conditioned to cheer the shrinking number on the scale, to treat it as progress. But after 65, weight loss without effort isn't always good news. It's often a warning sign, one most people ignore until their body stops working the way it used to. Fat loss might make you smaller. Muscle loss makes you fragile. There's a reason it feels different. Fat loss doesn't steal your energy. It doesn't make you feel dizzy when you stand or rob you of your grip. But muscle loss does. And the older you get, the faster it happens. That's why Harold's arms, though thinner, couldn't lift as much. Why his back ached after short walks. Why his naps felt deeper but never restful. His body was shrinking, yes, but not in a healthy way. It was breaking itself down to survive. The technical name is catabolism. When your body starts eating its own muscle for fuel, especially when it isn't getting the nutrients it needs. And the most dangerous part? It happens quietly. You still eat. You still sleep. But slowly, your reserves run dry. And no, you don't have to be starving for this to happen. Sometimes it's enough to simply eat less than before. Appetites change with age, but your body's need for protein, for movement, for resistance, that never stops. What Harold needed wasn't a diet. It was awareness. He didn't need to lose weight. He needed to rebuild strength. That's when the questions began. Real, hard questions. When did this start? What did I ignore? And how much more can I afford to lose before I lose something I can't get back? Have you or someone you love lost weight without trying? Tell me in the comments what changed first. Your clothes or your energy? Because sometimes that's the only clue we get, and paying attention might be the thing that saves you. Harold prided himself on eating right. A piece of toast in the morning, some soup for lunch, maybe fruit in the afternoon, and a light dinner. Nothing fried, nothing processed. He even cut down on red meat years ago. But even as he followed what he believed was a healthy routine, his strength faded. His arms thinned. His legs lost definition. The mirror didn't lie. He was disappearing. That's what confused him most. He wasn't skipping meals. He wasn't sick. So why was he losing muscle? The answer, as his doctor explained, wasn't just about what he ate. It was about how his body used it. After 65, something quiet and often overlooked happens inside the body. Anabolic resistance. It means your muscles no longer absorb protein the way they used to. Even if you're eating enough, your body may not be using it effectively. So the same breakfast that used to nourish your muscles now barely maintains them. It's like pouring water into dry soil and watching it run right off. The nutrients go in, but they don't sink deep enough to rebuild. That's why Harold's routine, that light, careful diet, was working against him. It wasn't enough to avoid unhealthy foods. He needed the right foods, in the right amounts, with the right timing. His doctor explained something most people never hear. Older adults need more protein, not less. Not to build bodybuilder muscles, but to hold on to what they already have. To stand, to walk, to breathe. Even the heart is a muscle, and when muscle fades, it's not just your legs that suffer, it's your life. Harold was shocked. How could a bowl of soup and a salad not be enough? But when he looked back, it made sense. He remembered the days he skipped breakfast. The afternoons he only had a banana. The nights when tea and toast were all he could manage. It added up. Each small choice chipped away at something bigger. That's the cruel trick of aging. You do what you think is right, and still feel worse. But knowledge is power. And Harold was learning. He started adding eggs to his mornings, Greek yogurt with almonds in the afternoon, a piece of chicken at dinner, even when he wasn't that hungry. It wasn't about eating more. It was about eating smarter. And slowly he noticed something. Less trembling, more steadiness. His grip felt stronger, his posture more upright. He wasn't failing. He'd just been feeding his body with kindness, but not with strength. And once he gave it what it needed, his body responded. Not like it did at 30, but enough to say, I'm still here. I'm still yours. Let's rebuild together. Harold always believed in moderation. He grew up in a time when eating light was seen as discipline, especially as you got older. A small breakfast, a careful lunch, a quiet dinner, maybe a walk if the weather was kind. He thought he was doing everything right. So when his doctor reviewed his tests and frowned, Harold didn't understand. His cholesterol was fine, his blood sugar manageable. But something else was wrong. His heart was working harder than it should, not because of blockage, not because of stress, but because there wasn't enough muscle left to support the rest of his body. The muscle mass around his ribs, shoulders, even his back, all thinner than normal. Even the heart itself, the most vital muscle of all, was under strain. You're underfed, the doctor said gently. Not in weight, in strength. It didn't make sense at first. Harold was eating. He wasn't starving. He hadn't lost his appetite completely, but he had fallen into a silent trap. Caloric undernourishment with aging. Here's how it works. As we age, our sense of hunger dulls. Our stomachs feel full faster. We eat less, often just enough to feel satisfied, but not enough to maintain the energy our bodies need, especially when it comes to preserving muscle. And when there's not enough fuel coming in, the body has to make a choice. It starts using itself as energy. First, it taps fat. Then, without enough protein or calories, it turns to muscle tissue. Bit by bit, the very substance that supports your joints, your lungs, and yes, your heart, begins to break down. Harold had unknowingly trained his body to survive on less. But the price was high. His metabolism slowed. His stamina dipped. And worst of all, his heart began compensating, pumping harder, faster, to do the work his shrinking muscles could no longer manage. This isn't rare. It's heartbreakingly common. So many older adults eat healthy by eating less, cutting meat, skipping meals, and choosing only light foods. But lightness can become frailty, and frailty can turn fatal. Harold needed a new plan. Not just more calories, but smarter calories. Foods that nourished, repaired, rebuilt, oats with peanut butter, tuna with olive oil, steamed vegetables, yes, but with rice and beans beside them. He didn't have to eat like he was young again. He just had to stop starving the strength he still had left. And slowly, the strain on his heart eased. His breathing grew calmer. His walks became longer. He hadn't known his heart was crying for help. But now, it was thanking him. One steady beat at a time. Harold wasn't expecting urgency. He'd gone to the appointment out of curiosity more than concern. His fall was weeks ago. He'd been more careful since then, moving slower, holding onto railings, taking breaks when needed. But his doctor wasn't smiling. She looked over the grip strength test, then his recent blood work. She took a deep breath. We have to act fast. That sentence stopped Harold cold. He thought he had time. He thought muscle loss was slow, something to accept, to manage. But his test results told a different story. His muscle mass had dropped sharply in the past year, and with it, his strength, his balance, his resilience. It wasn't just about movement anymore. It was about survival. What the doctor explained next was something Harold had never heard before, something most people don't realize until it's too late. After a certain point, the loss of muscle triggers a cascade of decline. Less muscle means less movement. Less movement means poor circulation, weaker bones, slower digestion, and all of that leads to something called functional dependence, needing help for tasks you used to do alone, bathing, dressing, cooking, walking. That's why she was so direct, because he was still just on the edge, still in a place where something could be done. Harold's grip strength, a surprisingly powerful predictor of health, was lower than 85% of men his age, and his protein levels were borderline deficient, even though he wasn't visibly malnourished. "You don't feel sick because this is a silent condition," she said, "but it doesn't stay silent. One more fall, one infection, one flu, and your body won't have the reserves to fight back." Harold sat there, stunned. It wasn't fear he felt. It was a sudden clarity, a sense that his body had been whispering for help, and he'd been too proud or too distracted to listen. But now, the whispers were turning into sirens. The doctor handed him a plan. Not just medicine, a full intervention, a strength program, a protein-rich meal plan, supplements tailored to his needs, follow-ups to monitor progress, and most of all, commitment. Not to youth, not to vanity, to function, to dignity, to being able to stay in his own home, to walk without fear, to pick up his granddaughter without trembling. Harold looked down at his hands. They didn't feel strong, but they still worked. They could still change things. He nodded. He wasn't ready to give up. And now, for the first time in years, someone had looked him in the eye and said, "We can fix this, but we have to move. Now." Harold didn't join a gym. He didn't hire a trainer. He didn't even leave his house. But something changed the day he picked up a pair of resistance bands, light, rubbery loops that looked almost like toys. They didn't seem like much. He doubted they'd do anything. He was wrong. At first, the movements were simple, holding the band in both hands and pulling outward, pressing it with his foot and curling his arm. Just 5 minutes, twice a day. He felt silly, weak, embarrassed even. But by the third day, something shifted. He wasn't less tired yet, but he was curious. Curious about how something so small made his muscles tremble. That trembling? That was the awakening. You see, resistance training isn't about lifting heavy weights. It's about giving your muscles a reason to stay alive. After 65, the body needs signals. When you stop challenging your muscles, they assume they're no longer needed, and they begin to disappear. But give them resistance, just a little, and they come back to life. The bands did something Harold hadn't felt in a long time. They made him feel engaged, present in his own body. Not like he was fighting age, but like he was reconnecting with the strength he'd thought was gone. Each week, the routine grew, sitting and standing from a chair without using his arms, lifting a soup can overhead 10 times, stepping up onto the first stair, holding the rail, and staying there, balanced. By the end of week 2, he noticed the stairs didn't seem quite so tall. By week 4, he wasn't bracing his hands against his thighs to stand, and by week 6, he climbed the full flight of stairs in his house, without pausing halfway to catch his breath. He cried that day, not out of pain or pride, but because he felt something he hadn't felt in years: independence. That's the gift of strength, not muscles for show, muscles for life, for cooking, for hugging, for walking without fear of falling, for getting off the toilet alone. These are victories no one applauds, but they mean everything. Harold's story isn't rare, and the tool he used? You can find it in any pharmacy for less than the cost of a meal. A resistance band. A strip of rubber that, when used consistently, rebuilds confidence one quiet rep at a time. He didn't chase youth. He chased function. And day by day, breath by breath, step by step, he caught it. Harold didn't say anything the day she pointed it out. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun lower itself behind the trees, when his granddaughter leaned gently on his shoulder and said, "Grandpa, you don't shake as much anymore." He hadn't even realized he'd stopped. For months, she'd noticed his hands tremble when he reached for a glass, the way he gripped the banister with both hands going up the stairs, the way he'd pause before stepping off the curb like the ground might slip away beneath him. She never mentioned it, but she saw everything. And when she spoke those quiet words, "You don't shake as much anymore," Harold felt something swell in his chest. Not pride, not relief, recognition. Someone had noticed. Not his decline, his return. It's often those closest to us who see the signs first. The hesitation in our walk, the fatigue in our eyes, the shift in our posture. And yet, most of us try to hide these changes. We pretend, minimize, laugh it off. But our families know. They know when the hugs get softer, when we stop getting up from the floor, when we say, "I'm fine," but move slower every time. What Harold learned that day is that listening to those who love you isn't giving up control. It's trusting the mirror they hold for you. Sometimes they see the danger before we feel it, and sometimes they see the healing before we believe it's happening. That one comment changed his routine, because now the exercises weren't just for him. They were for her. For every time she looked at him and saw strength where there had been fear. For the next time she said, "Let's go for a walk," and he didn't hesitate. For the moment she grabbed his hand, and it was steady in hers. Harold began to realize that muscle wasn't just about movement. It was about presence. Being there, fully, not just in body, but in energy, in confidence, in love. When he stood taller, she smiled differently. When he moved easier, she laughed more. And when he carried the groceries in from the car, she whispered, "You're getting strong again, Grandpa." That meant more than any test, more than any doctor's chart. Because we don't always notice the day we start to fade. But sometimes someone who loves us, quietly, tenderly, helps us come back. And all it takes is one sentence, one moment of being seen. That's when Harold knew. This wasn't just his journey, it was theirs. Harold had never cared about numbers. He didn't weigh himself often. He didn't track calories. But when his doctor mentioned that he had gained 4 pounds of lean muscle without gaining any fat, he raised his eyebrows. 4 pounds? At 73? He almost didn't believe it, until he felt it. The way his knees no longer buckled when he stood. The way his back stayed straighter when he walked. The way his shirt fit differently across his shoulders. But how? It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't some expensive program. It was a quiet combination of 3 things: the right breakfast, the right timing, and 20 minutes of daily movement. Let's start with breakfast. Harold used to skip it, or just have toast and coffee, but his doctor explained that the first meal of the day sets the tone for muscle preservation. Your body wakes up after hours of fasting. Without fuel, it starts drawing from reserves, often muscle. So Harold began his mornings differently. 2 boiled eggs, a slice of whole grain toast with peanut butter, a glass of milk or a protein shake, not heavy, just complete. Within a week, he noticed he didn't get lightheaded mid-morning. His energy didn't dip as fast. His walks felt smoother. Next came timing. He learned that older adults benefit from even protein distribution, not just a big dinner. So he added small, protein-rich snacks throughout the day. A handful of almonds, a cup of yogurt, tuna on crackers, a slice of turkey with avocado. Each small boost fed his muscles exactly when they needed it. And finally, movement. Not intense, just intentional. 10 minutes in the morning, 10 in the evening. Resistance bands, chair squats, wall push-ups, stepping in place during commercials. What mattered wasn't the intensity, it was the consistency. And it worked. Muscle, unlike fat, doesn't appear overnight, but it responds, especially in those who've lost it. And for Harold, those 4 pounds changed everything. They gave him balance. They gave him energy. They gave him back the ability to reach, to carry, to walk without fear of falling. More importantly, they gave him back ownership of his body. He didn't look like a young man, but he moved like a man who had reclaimed his foundation. Every pound of muscle was a quiet victory. Not for looks, for life. Because strength after 65 isn't about aesthetics. It's about survival. It's about staying in your home, holding your grandchild, walking through your garden without pain. And Harold did it, not through force, but through understanding. 4 pounds, enough to carry himself forward, enough to carry his life with dignity again. Harold stood in front of the mirror, shirt off, eyes steady. He wasn't trying to look younger. He wasn't judging wrinkles or searching for hair he no longer had. He was searching for something else. Am I still here? All of me? Because something strange happens after 65, and most people don't even notice it. You don't just lose weight. You lose presence. The stairs start to feel taller. Your clothes hang differently. Your arms don't quite reach the top shelf anymore. People begin offering help before you ask. And you start avoiding things, kneeling, lifting, even hugging too tight. Not out of fear, but out of uncertainty. That's the shrinking no one talks about. It's not always visible in the mirror, but your body remembers. Your legs remember when they could hold you up without hesitation. Your back remembers when standing didn't mean bracing. Your spirit remembers when movement felt free, not careful. Harold didn't realize how much he had shrunk until he began rebuilding. Not just in size, but in confidence. He began reaching higher, holding longer, walking farther. The small aches were still there, but they no longer whispered weakness. They whispered effort. Because strength isn't about perfection. It's about returning to the version of you that could carry groceries, to the version of you that could kneel to pick up a grandchild and stand again, smiling. And that return begins with recognition. Are you shrinking without realizing it? Pay attention to the signals. Do you feel less stable when getting dressed? Do you avoid chairs without armrests? Do you wake up feeling weaker than the day before? These aren't just signs of age. They are calls for action. And the good news? You can answer them. At any age, in any condition, muscle remembers. The body adapts. And even after years of loss, recovery is possible. Harold didn't set out to become stronger. He just wanted to stop disappearing. And in that quiet pursuit, he found more than strength. He found himself again. Which of these signs surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments. Your story might help someone else notice in time. Because sometimes the first step to rebuilding is simply realizing you've been fading.